There is a strange phenomenon in human relationships. Sometimes the hostility you face has very little to do with what you have done and everything to do with what you represent. You walk into a room, say very little, and yet someone feels irritated. You succeed quietly, and someone feels personally attacked. You speak your truth calmly, and someone reacts as if you declared war. What is happening beneath the surface is not always conflict. It is projection. Projection is the unconscious act of seeing in others what we refuse to see in ourselves. It is a psychological defense mechanism that protects the ego from discomfort. Instead of confronting our jealousy, we accuse others of arrogance. Instead of facing our laziness, we label others as obsessive. Instead of admitting our dishonesty, we call others untrustworthy. The enemy we think we are fighting outside is often a disowned part of ourselves. This is why growth can make you a target. When you develop discipline, you become a mirror to someone's procrastination. When you build confidence, you reflect another person's insecurity. When you pursue your purpose, you awaken the silent regret in someone who abandoned theirs. And mirrors are dangerous things. They do not lie. They reveal. But not everyone is ready to see their reflection. Imagine someone who secretly doubts their worth. They carry this doubt quietly, buried under layers of pride. Then you arrive, self-assured, calm, unapologetic. You are not trying to compete. You are not even aware of their internal struggle. Yet your mere presence forces them to confront what they have avoided. Instead of asking, why does this trigger me? They unconsciously decide, I don't like this person. The discomfort must belong to you, not them. Projection transforms inner conflict into outer enemies. It is easier to criticize your ambition than to admit they lack courage. It is easier to mock your boundaries than to face their own inability to say no. It is easier to resent your happiness than to confront their unresolved pain. By making you the problem, they preserve their self-image. This is why hatred can appear without clear cause. It feels irrational because it is rooted in the unconscious. You become the screen onto which they cast their denied emotions. Their anger may not even be about you. It is about the part of themselves they cannot accept. Projection does not only operate negatively. Sometimes people project their idealized qualities onto others as well. They may see you as flawless, wise, or powerful beyond measure. But even this is unstable. The moment you fail to embody their fantasy, admiration can flip into resentment. When they realize you are human, they feel betrayed, not because you changed, but because their illusion collapsed. Understanding projection changes how you interpret conflict. Instead of absorbing every accusation as truth, you begin to ask, is this really about me? Or am I carrying someone else's shadow? This does not mean you are perfect or beyond self-examination. Self-awareness is crucial. But it does mean you stop internalizing hostility that originates in someone else's unprocessed emotions. You recognize that you cannot heal what others refuse to acknowledge within themselves. Ironically, the more authentic you become, the more projection you may encounter. Authenticity strips away masks, and masks feel threatened in its presence. When you live honestly, you expose the gap between who people are and who they pretend to be. Some will be inspired, others will feel attacked. Enemies born from projection are not created by your aggression, but by your existence. Your light reveals shadows. Your courage highlights fear. Your self-respect challenges complacency. And for those unwilling to integrate their own hidden parts, it is safer to fight you than to face themselves. Growth is rarely a private event. Even when it begins internally, it eventually becomes visible. Your mindset shifts, your standards rise, your habits change, the way you speak, walk, and carry yourself transforms. And while you may believe this evolution concerns only you, it inevitably affects the psychological equilibrium of the people around you. Growth disrupts comfort, not just your own, but theirs. When you begin improving yourself, you unknowingly challenge the silent agreements within your relationships. There is often an unspoken contract between people. I will remain who I am if you remain who you are. This agreement creates stability. It makes everyone feel safe. No one has to question themselves. No one has to stretch beyond their limits. But the moment you decide to evolve, that balance shifts. Your discipline exposes someone else's lack of it. Your ambition highlights another person's complacency. Your courage reveals someone's hesitation. Even if you never say a word about it, your transformation becomes a mirror, and mirrors can be uncomfortable. Insecurity is not always loud. It does not always announce itself with obvious jealousy. Often, it hides behind subtle comments, sarcasm, or distance. The friend who once celebrated your small wins may now minimize your larger achievements. The partner who once supported your dreams may start questioning your new direction. The colleague who once felt equal may suddenly compete. It is not always because they wish you harm. Sometimes it is because your growth forces them into comparison. Comparison is the breeding ground of insecurity. When you change, people are compelled to measure themselves against you. If they feel they are falling short, discomfort arises. And instead of channeling that discomfort into their own growth, they may attempt to slow yours down. This is where resistance appears. They may say you have changed, and they are right. Growth requires change. But what they often mean is, you are no longer predictable. And unpredictability threatens those who rely on stability to maintain their identity. Imagine two people standing at the same level for years. They share similar struggles, similar excuses, similar habits. There is comfort in mutual limitation. But when one person decides to climb higher, the dynamic alters. The one who remains below now feels the distance. That distance can either inspire or intimidate. If there is inner strength, it inspires. If there is hidden insecurity, it intimidates. Insecurity whispers dangerous narratives. It says, if they grow, they will leave me behind. It says, if they succeed, it means I failed. It says, if they become stronger, I will feel smaller. These narratives are rarely spoken aloud. They operate beneath awareness, but their influence is powerful. They can turn admiration into resentment and closeness into tension. Growth also challenges identity. People grow accustomed to seeing you in a certain role, the quiet one, the agreeable one, the struggling one, the dependent one. When you break that role, it destabilizes their perception of reality. If you were once the insecure friend and now you radiate confidence, it forces them to reconsider who they are in relation to you. Relationships are often built on shared identities. When one identity shifts, the foundation trembles. This does not mean growth is wrong. It means growth is transformative. Transformation is disruptive by nature. It rearranges social hierarchies. It shifts power dynamics. It dissolves old patterns. And insecurity thrives on familiarity. Some people will attempt to anchor you to your former self. They may remind you of your past mistakes. They may subtly discourage your ambitions. They may joke about your new habits as if they are phases. These reactions are not always malicious. They are protective mechanisms. They protect their comfort zone from the threat of change. True security, however, responds differently. Secure individuals celebrate growth because they do not interpret it as competition. They understand that someone else's evolution does not diminish their worth. But not everyone operates from that level of awareness. As you continue to rise, you may notice a thinning circle. Not because you pushed people away, but because growth acts as a filter. It reveals who is inspired by your progress and who is unsettled by it. Your expansion forces a choice in others, evolve alongside you, or confront their own resistance. And many will resist, not because you wronged them, but because your courage to grow confronts the parts of themselves they have chosen to ignore. Helping someone seems like a purely noble act. It appears generous, compassionate, and selfless. You extend your hand when someone is struggling. You offer guidance when someone is lost. You provide support when someone feels weak. On the surface, help looks like connection. But beneath the surface, something more complex is happening. Help disrupts ego. The ego is the structure we build to feel stable, capable, and in control. It tells us we are independent. It tells us we can manage on our own. It protects our sense of identity. When everything is functioning smoothly, the ego feels strong. But the moment we need help, a crack forms in that structure. To receive help is to admit limitation. And limitation is uncomfortable for the ego. When you help someone, even with pure intentions, you unconsciously position yourself as the stronger one in that moment. You are the one with clarity, resources, knowledge, or stability. They are the one in need. Even if the roles reverse later, in that specific interaction, the imbalance is real. Some people can accept this with humility. They see help as temporary support, not a threat to their identity. But others experience something deeper. They may smile and say thank you, yet internally they feel exposed. Help reminds them of vulnerability. Vulnerability challenges pride, and pride, when fragile, reacts defensively. The ego does not like to feel indebted. It does not like to feel dependent. It especially does not like to remember the moment it was powerless while someone else stood firm. That memory can linger long after the crisis is over. At first, gratitude may dominate. But as time passes, the mind begins to reinterpret the experience. Instead of remembering, they supported me, the ego may twist it into, they saw me at my weakest. That shift is subtle but powerful. Being witnessed in weakness can feel threatening, even if you never mention it again, even if you never use it against them. The mere fact that you were there means you hold a piece of their story, a chapter where they were not strong. If their sense of self is insecure, that awareness becomes uncomfortable, and discomfort seeks relief. One way the ego protects itself is by minimizing your role. They may downplay what you did. They may convince themselves they would have succeeded anyway. They may subtly criticize you later to rebalance the power dynamic. This is not always conscious. It is psychological equilibrium attempting to restore itself. There is also another layer. Help creates an invisible hierarchy. Even if you treat the other person as an equal, the act itself establishes contrast. You had what they lacked. You stood steady while they were shaken. That contrast can bruise pride. The ego prefers equality or superiority. It resists inferiority. So, When someone helps repeatedly, the imbalance grows heavier. The receiver may begin to feel small, even if you never intended that outcome. Over time, that smallness can transform into resentment. Resentment often masks shame. Shame says, I should not have needed help. Shame says, oh, I am less because I struggled. Instead of confronting that shame, the ego externalizes it. It shifts discomfort outward. It may label the helper as controlling, arrogant, or self-righteous. Even if none of those qualities are present, the helper becomes the symbol of wounded pride. This is why sometimes the people you sacrifice for become distant, why the ones you rescue grow cold. It is not always because your help was wrong. It is because their ego could not integrate the vulnerability attached to receiving it. True maturity requires the ability to accept help without feeling diminished. It requires separating temporary weakness from permanent identity. But not everyone has cultivated that awareness. Helping someone test their ego structure. If it is secure, the bond strengthens. If it is fragile, tension develops. And if you do not recognize this dynamic, you may continue offering support while unconsciously deepening a psychological imbalance that the other person cannot tolerate. Betrayal feels intentional. It feels sharp, calculated, and personal. When someone you trusted turns against you, your first instinct is to believe they meant to hurt you. It appears deliberate. It appears cold. But beneath the surface of many betrayals lies something less dramatic and more psychological defense. Betrayal is often an unconscious defense mechanism. Human beings are driven by a deep need to preserve their self-image. We construct identities carefully. Strong, loyal, independent, moral, competent. When something threatens that identity, the psyche reacts swiftly. It does not always react logically. It reacts protectively. If being close to you challenges how someone sees themselves, tension begins to build. Perhaps your integrity highlights their dishonesty. Perhaps your growth exposes their stagnation. Perhaps your strength reminds them of their dependency. The discomfort may be subtle at first, almost invisible, but the mind does not tolerate prolonged internal conflict. Instead of confronting the discomfort directly, the unconscious seeks escape. Defense mechanisms activate when the ego feels endangered. Projection, denial, rationalization. These are common responses. Betrayal can become one of them. It is not always about strategy. It is about psychological survival. Imagine someone who once relied on you heavily. You supported them, guided them, and witnessed their vulnerability. Over time, they regain stability. Outwardly, everything seems restored. Inwardly, however, the memory of needing you lingers. That memory may conflict with their desired self-image of independence and strength. The unresolved tension must go somewhere rather than integrating the truth. I was vulnerable, and that is human. The psyche may rewrite the narrative. They were controlling. They made me feel small, though. They think they're superior. These distortions ease the internal discomfort. By recasting you as flawed, they protect their ego from feeling inferior. The betrayal then becomes a way to regain power. When someone distances themselves, spreads rumors, shares your secrets, or aligns with your opposition, it can be an attempt to rebalance an internal scale. They unconsciously try to move from the position of vulnerability into one of control. In doing so, they may convince themselves they are justified. Unconscious defense rarely feels immoral to the one enacting it. It feels necessary. There is also the fear of abandonment hidden within betrayal. Paradoxically, Some people betray preemptively. If they sense you are evolving beyond them, they may feel insecure about losing you. Instead of admitting this fear, they detach first. They sabotage the connection before they can be left behind. It is easier to say, "I chose to walk away," than to admit, "I was afraid of being left." Or defense mechanisms operate quickly and quietly. They protect the ego from shame, guilt, envy, and fear. But in protecting the ego, they can damage relationships. Betrayal can also arise when someone feels exposed. When you see through their patterns, recognize their weaknesses, or hold them accountable, it threatens their internal narrative. Exposure can feel like danger. To neutralize that danger, they may attempt to discredit you. If they can weaken your credibility, they restore their own. None of this removes responsibility. Understanding unconscious defense does not excuse harmful behavior, but it does shift the perspective. It reveals that betrayal is often less about cruelty and more about fragility. Fragility disguised as aggression, shame disguised as anger, fear disguised as indifference. When someone cannot tolerate the vulnerability required for honest connection, defense becomes their refuge. Instead of saying, "I feel insecure around you," they create distance through harm. Instead of admitting, "Your growth unsettles me," they undermine it. Betrayal in these cases is not an act of strength. It is an attempt to escape inner conflict. And inner conflict, when avoided long enough, always searches for an external target. There comes a point in life when pleasing others becomes more exhausting than disappointing them. A moment when fitting in feels heavier than standing alone. This is the quiet beginning of individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are rather than who you were conditioned to be. It is a sacred transformation. It is also a lonely one. Individuation requires separation from expectations, from inherited beliefs, from roles you once played to secure love and approval. For years, most people construct their identity around belonging. They adapt their personality to match their environment. They silence opinions to avoid rejection. They shrink dreams to maintain harmony. This adaptation keeps relationships intact, but it distances them from themselves. When individuation begins, the mask starts to crack. You begin questioning what you once accepted blindly. You examine traditions, values, and habits that shaped you. You notice where you compromised your authenticity to preserve connection. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. But here is the cost. Not everyone benefits from your authenticity. Some relationships were built on who you pretended to be. When you stop pretending, the foundation trembles. The friend who bonded with your insecurity feels unsettled by your confidence. The partner who relied on your compliance feels challenged by your boundaries. The family member who expected obedience feels threatened by your independence. Individuation disrupts comfort zones, not only yours, but theirs. You may feel misunderstood. People might say you have changed, as if change were betrayal. They may accuse you of becoming distant, when in truth you are becoming clear. The loneliness does not come from isolation alone. It comes from realizing that few people are willing to grow alongside you. There is also an internal loneliness. When you detach from collective identity, you stand face to face with yourself. Without distractions, without constant validation, you confront your fears, contradictions, and unresolved wounds. Individuation demands self-honesty, and self-honesty strips away illusions. You may discover traits within you that do not fit your old self-image. Anger you suppressed, desires you denied, strength you feared. Integrating these hidden parts can feel like walking through darkness without a guide. In the early stages, it seems easier to return to familiarity, to put the mask back on, to laugh at jokes that diminish you, to accept roles that feel suffocating. Belonging is warm. Authenticity can feel cold, but belonging without authenticity creates inner emptiness. The loneliness of individuation is not the absence of people, it is the absence of false connection. It is the silence that replaces constant noise. It is the distance that replaces superficial approval. Yet within that loneliness lies clarity. You begin to recognize who resonates with your truth and who resists it. The circle may shrink, but the depth increases. Conversations become more honest. Relationships become less performative. You no longer seek validation at the cost of integrity. Still, the path remains narrow. There will be evenings when you question whether the transformation is worth it. Moments when you miss the simplicity of conformity. Times when you feel like a stranger in familiar spaces. The in between stage, no longer who you were, not fully who you are becoming, is particularly isolating. Individuation dismantles identity piece by piece. It removes borrowed beliefs and inherited fears. It demands that you stand without external scaffolding. Few people understand this process, and even fewer can accompany you through it. Some will fall away naturally. Others will leave abruptly. You will grieve versions of relationships that cannot survive your evolution. That grief is part of the process. To become whole, you must tolerate standing alone, not because you are unworthy of connection, but because true connection requires authenticity, and authenticity cannot emerge without separation from what once defined you. The loneliness of individuation is the space where your real voice becomes audible. It is the silence where your inner compass recalibrates. It is the distance that reveals what is essential and what was merely convenient. And as you continue walking this path, you begin to understand that the solitude is not punishment, but purification, a necessary stripping away of illusions so that what remains is undeniably yours